One thing that's always sticks in my mind about kind of contemporary technologies of war is how ethics of due care has kind of shifted. So in Michael Walzer's Just and Unjust Wars, any of you who have taken Dr. Williams' Ethics of War class have probably read this kind of classic work. He talks about how soldiers need to exercise due care in order to protect civilian casualties. Right? And the example that he gives us is World War I, there's a British soldier kind of clearing out houses in the French countryside of German soldiers, but there's also civilians in hiding, right? So what the soldier can do when they're going into the basement, they can either throw a grenade down on the off chance there's German soldiers hiding in the basement, or they can call down first and tell people to come out, right? By doing that, they expose themselves to some risk, right? There may be families hiding in the basement, but at the same time, there may be German soldiers that they're alerting that they're going to be coming in, and then they can put up a fight, right? But what Walzer wants to say is this is exercising due care. Soldiers must put themselves at some risk in order to protect civilian life, right? And what's difficult in drone warfare is that soldiers are no longer at risk, right? And then when we especially take humans out of the loop, there's no longer soldiers operating the drones when they're doing it with artificial intelligence, right? It's a complete asymmetric conflict, right? Now, some ethicists find no problem with asymmetry, right? They say that we should protect our soldiers first and then worry about their civilians later, but I kind of take the opposite approach, where I think civilians first need to be protected, and yes, we should protect our soldiers within reason, but they're also soldiers, and they also need to expose themselves to some risk in order to fight justly. It's what we expect our soldiers to do. And in addition to having this kind of technology of warfare with drones and kind of a future of killer robots is we construct war as inherently more ethical and less bloody, right? And my worry is that it will cause us to intervene in places where we wouldn't be going to war otherwise, right? I doubt we would be at war right now in Somalia with troops on the ground or in tribal areas of Pakistan, right? But with drones, it's easy because you don't expose yourself to risk, and it has pretty broad popularity at home, right? The idea is that you're killing the bad guys and your troops aren't at risk, right? That sells very well, and it shows that you're doing something about terrorism. And within all of this, we have this further idea that we're somehow individualizing warfare, right? We're no longer bombing cities, but we can take out individuals. But like I showed you with the kind of leaks from the NSA and the way we're targeting with SIM card metadata, we're no longer actually targeting individuals. We're targeting heterogeneous constructions of individuals based on their metadata, right? And so just think about the metadata that is tracked from you from all the sites that you visit and everything like that. If you could be flagged for investigation, right? But in general, we don't have a problem with the business applications of that. But then think, would I want my algorithmic code to determine someone's life or death, right? And I think most software engineers would probably say no to that, right? I think it's good for targeting ads for you. When you visit something, then you see the ads pop up for days and days and days on end, right? But applying that to a killing machine is very different. And so some of you may have heard of Project Maven. It made it into the news a while back. It was part of the Department of Defense's algorithmic warfare cross-functional team, right? And so basically what they were doing is they were partnering with Google to fly drones over active combat zones of Syria, Iraq, and different parts of Africa. And they were training this machine learning algorithm in order to take in kind of all these visual stimuli and train it to identify targets, right? So the Department of Defense says, we're developing this targeting software within drones to automatically detect, recognize, classify, identify, and target personnel and ground platforms or other targets of interest, right? And so there was a big uproar from a lot of Google employees. They say, we don't want to be involved in the Department of Defense's drone program. And so they let their contract expire, which was somewhere of the tune of $400 to $450 million, right? But so that was something that they were really pushing for because they didn't want to be involved in this. Because they understand, even though drones are trained on this kind of terrain and that it's kind of learning from these things, that it still makes mistakes, right? You need to understand kind of a cultural context on the ground, and everything else in order to know what to target, right? It's not like an open battlefield where you can say only target tanks, right? Because enemies of today aren't necessarily using tanks. And so you run into these kind of dilemmas that some companies in Silicon Valley and some software engineers are saying, we don't want to be a part of this. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there's a lot of money to be made, and there's others who are actively involved in this. So there's a guy named Palmer Luckey. He kind of made it in the news a while back because he was a 26-year-old who developed this virtual reality kind of software and headset, and someone ended up buying his company, or Facebook ended up buying his company for the tune of $3 billion, right? And he was estimated to get about 700 million of that, right? So this 26-year-old guy who famously shows up in his Hawaiian shirts and flip-flops to business meetings was recently awarded a military AI contract as part of this project Maven. And what's interesting about it is that he kind of takes the opposite approach of Google and Project Maven. He even wrote an op-ed criticizing them, saying that we need to be on the forefront of this, you're neglecting the US military, and that we need to be the ones kind of designing this AI, because the better technology we get, the more ethical we can be. So he kind of epitomizes for me the kind of techno-optimist that my work kind of tries to push back against. And so basically the program that he was working on for the Pentagon, which was reported in The Intercept, talked about they were going to fly in drones and different things to do kind of 3D terrain mapping of any war zone. And so I'll quote him kind of at length here just so you can get a sense of what he's talking about. He says, "What we're working on is taking data from lots of different sensors, putting them into an AI-powered sensor fusion platform so that you can build a perfect 3D model of everything, right, going on in a large area. Then we take that data, run predictive analytics, and tag everything with metadata, and find what's relevant, then push it to people in the field." Right? So they want to quantify the entire complex battlefield. He says, "Practically speaking, in the future, I think soldiers are going to be superheroes who have the power of perfect omniscience over their area of operations, where they know where every enemy is, where every friend is, where every asset is." Right? You can see the kind of video game Silicon Valley mentality here, right? The idea that you can go into such a complex environment and to be able to easily determine, like highlight in red and green, who are your friends and who are your enemies, very much thinks like a video game, right? But is not accurate of the reality that you would see on the ground, right? The problem with artificial intelligence, even that we see today in self-driving cars, right, is it works really well in simple environments, right? But it really fails in complex environments. And war is the most complex environment that you can ever have. And he goes on to say that technological superiority is a prerequisite for ethical superiority. Right? And this is kind of the most troubling element to me, and it epitomizes the technological determinism. Nothing is inherent in the technology. Sure, it can allow us to be more ethical on the battlefield, but that's also a political, strategic, and tactical choice, right? This technology doesn't make you more ethical. It's the way that you use and deploy it, right? So you forget that it's not just inherent to the tech itself, but it's how we decide to use it.